In the rolling hills of Nagaland, where the mist clings to the emerald forests and the rivers whisper secrets to the wind, there lived a man named Jina and a woman named Etiben. Their story, passed down through generations, was not just a tale of love, but one of longing, defiance, and the cruel hands of fate that wove their destiny into tragedy. Among the Ao Naga people, where traditions shaped every bond and love was seldom left to chance, their hearts found each other in a world determined to keep them apart. Jina was a man of quiet strength. He belonged to a humble background, known not for wealth or lineage, but for his unwavering spirit and kindness. He worked hard, tending to the land with hands that knew both labor and tenderness. The village knew him as a man of integrity, one who would stand by his word, and yet, in the rigid lines drawn by birth and status, he was seen as unworthy of someone like Etiben. Etiben, in contrast, was a woman born into a family of wealth and prestige. She was admired not only for her beauty, but for her intelligence, a mind quick with wit, and a heart that longed for freedom beyond the walls built by tradition. Her laughter carried like bird song through the village, and many sought her hand, yet her heart had already chosen. It had chosen Jina, the man who, despite his lesser standing, had a soul that spoke to hers in a way no wealth ever could. Their love began as a quiet, unspoken thing. In the stolen glances across the village paths, in the whispered words exchanged under the ancient trees, in the shared moments that seemed too brief, yet stretched into eternity in their minds. But love, in their world, was never just about two hearts. It was about families, alliances, and expectations. What should have been simple became a challenge. For Etiben's family had ambitions that did not include a man of Jina's standing. The village elders, the keepers of order and tradition, were the first to voice their disapproval. A woman of Etiben's status could not lower herself to love a man like Jina. She was meant for a suitor with riches, a man who could offer her family more than just devotion. Murmurs spread, turning whispers into judgments, and soon, what was once a love story became a battle against forces greater than themselves. Yet, Jina and Etiben did not yield easily. They met in secret, beneath the silver glow of the moon, where the world seemed to forget its rules, and only their love remained. Etiben, bold and defiant, swore she would love none but him, and Jina, steadfast as the earth itself, vowed that no force could take her from him. But the world they lived in was not one to let love triumph without a cost. Etiben's family, unwilling to let her defiance tarnish their name, chose to act. A marriage was arranged with a wealthy suitor, a man who saw Etiben not as a partner, but as a possession to be claimed. She was given no choice. Her protests were ignored, her tears dismissed as childish folly. The day she was taken from Jina was one etched in sorrow. The sky itself seemed to weep as she was led away, her gaze searching for the man she loved, while he stood powerless, watching the future they had dreamed of shatter before them. But love, true love, does not break so easily. Jina did not accept defeat, and Etiben, though bound by duty, did not forget the man who held her heart. Their love, though torn apart by the world, still lived, burning quietly like embers beneath the ashes of despair. It was a love that refused to be silenced, a love that would fight against fate itself. Their story was far from over. Etiben's absence was a wound that Jina carried in silence. Days passed, then weeks, but time did nothing to dull the ache that had settled in his chest. He wandered the familiar paths where they once met, his fingers tracing the rough bark of trees that had once stood witness to their whispered promises. He knew that somewhere beyond the hills, beyond the reach of his voice, Etiben was trapped in a life she had never chosen. The thought tormented him, and yet he refused to believe that this was the end of their love. Etiben, too, suffered. The home she was taken to was nothing more than a golden cage. Her husband was a man of wealth and power, but there was no warmth in his touch, no tenderness in his gaze. He expected submission, not love, obedience, not companionship. Each day felt heavier than the last, her spirit wilting beneath the weight of duty. She would sit by the window, staring at the distant horizon, longing for a glimpse of the world she had left behind, for the voice that once called her name with such gentleness. One evening, when the sky burned with the hues of dusk, a message reached her in secret. A scrap of cloth, wrapped around a small stone, lay hidden beneath the edge of her door. Her heart pounded as she unfolded it, revealing a single line written in careful strokes. Asterisk, I am waiting. Asterisk, she clutched the note to her chest, her pulse thrumming with both fear and exhilaration. Jina had not given up on her. He had not let the world erase what they had shared. That night, under the veil of darkness, she slipped away. The air was thick with the scent of earth and rain as she moved through the fields, her breath coming in quiet gasps. Her feet knew the way, drawn by something deeper than memory. And then, beneath the canopy of an ancient tree, she saw him. Jina stood there, his figure bathed in the pale glow of the moon, his eyes filled with a mixture of longing and relief. Neither of them spoke at first. Words felt too small, too fragile to contain the storm of emotions that surged between them. Instead, it was in the way Etiben's fingers trembled when they found his, the way Jina's breath hitched as he pulled her close. For that moment, nothing else existed. No boundaries, no rules, no chains of expectation. Only them. But the world was never kind to love that defied its rules. The news of Etiben's escape spread like wildfire, reaching the ears of her husband and family before the dawn had even broken. Outrage swept through the village, and men were sent out to bring her back, their torches casting angry shadows against the walls of the night. Jina and Etiben knew they had little time. Hand in hand, they fled into the wilderness, their only hope lying beyond the reach of those who sought to tear them apart. They ran through the dense forests, across rivers that gleamed like silver under the moon's watchful eye, their breaths mingling with the rustling leaves. They spoke of dreams yet to be fulfilled, of a life where they could be free, where love was not a crime. But fate had other plans. By dawn, they were found. The men who came for them were relentless, their faces hard with duty and resentment. Etiben was torn from Jina's grasp, her cries swallowed by the morning air. He fought, his fists meeting flesh, his heart roaring with desperation, but he was only one against many. Etiben's husband stood among them, watching with cold satisfaction. He had no need to fight. His wealth ensured that others would do it for him. He did not see Jina as a rival, only as a man foolish enough to believe love could overturn power. With a single nod, he gave the command. Jina was to be beaten, humiliated, and left as a warning to anyone who dared defy tradition. The blows rained down upon him, each strike laced with the cruelty of men who had never known love strong enough to challenge the world. Blood stained the earth beneath him, but Jina did not cry out. His eyes never left Etiben, even as his vision blurred, even as his strength ebbed. And in those final moments before darkness took him, he saw the tears that streaked her face, saw the silent scream trapped in her throat. They took her away, dragging her back to the life she had tried to escape. Jina lay unmoving, his body broken, his heart shattered. But even as he slipped into unconsciousness, one truth remained. His love for Etiben had not been defeated. It had not been silenced. And as long as that love existed, their story was not over. The village moved on, as villages always do. Seasons passed, rivers swelled and receded, and new stories wove themselves into the fabric of daily life. Yet, the tale of Jina and Etiben did not fade. It lingered in hushed whispers by the fireside, in songs sung beneath the full moon, in the sorrowful eyes of those who dared to dream of a love that defied the world. Their story was no longer just theirs. It had become a legend, a lesson, a wound carried by generations who would never forget the price they had paid. Love, in its truest form, is an act of defiance. Jina and Etiben had stood against the chains of tradition, against the expectations that bound them from birth. In a society where marriage was a transaction, where love was a privilege granted only to those who met the conditions set by family and wealth, they had chosen differently. Their love was not cautious or practical. It was reckless, boundless, and willing to suffer for the chance to exist. And in that, they became something more than just lovers. They became symbols of all that was feared and forbidden. The river that ran past their village carried their story beyond its banks. Travelers brought news of a love that had fought and lost, yet remained undefeated in spirit. The lovers who heard it saw themselves reflected in its tragedy, in the unspoken pain of choices made not with the heart but with duty. Some claimed that Jina's final breath had carried Etiben's name, that his love had been so strong it refused to leave the world even when his body could no longer hold it. Others whispered that Etiben, though bound by obligation, had never truly returned to her husband, that she had become a ghost in her own home, forever reaching toward a love she had once held but could never touch again. Their story did not end with their suffering. It lived on in the ways people spoke of it, in the questions it forced them to ask. Was love more powerful than fate? Could two souls meant for each other ever be truly separated? And if love was strong enough to challenge tradition, why was it so often crushed beneath its weight? In the hills of Nagaland, the land itself seemed to remember. The trees that had sheltered their secret meetings stood tall, whispering their names in the rustling of leaves. The earth that had soaked in Jina's blood remained sacred, a silent witness to a love that refused to be forgotten. Some said that on quiet nights, when the wind moved just right, one could still hear the echoes of Etiben's cries, still feel the presence of a love unfinished, waiting for another time, another life. Perhaps that is why their tale endures, not just as a tragedy, but as a reminder. Love, no matter how forbidden, no matter how doomed, leaves something behind. It carves itself into the world, into the hearts of those who hear of it, changing them in ways even time cannot erase. And so, the story of Jina and Etiben does not end. It lingers, waiting for those who will listen, for those who will love, and for those who will one day dare to fight for what their hearts refuse to surrender.